Hello everyone, this video is going to go over your close read annotations for the bells. We have our reading tab as tab 1, this is where your annotations will be placed, and then your actual assessment, your tests, will take place on tab 2 where it says write. We have 4 sets of focus questions to cover, and before we begin, from the right of skill focus, click where it says split screen. And now when your screen is split, you're going to want to have the annotation button on as well as the numbers button on. Just like in the last video, I've already made my annotations based on the focus questions, different colors per question. So it'll save us some time. That way you don't have to hear me type and edit my writing as we're going. So focus question number 1 today. Onomatopoeia is the use of words to represent specific sounds. As you reread the bells, highlight examples of onomatopoeia that you see in the first and third stanzas. 2 specific stanzas to annotate. How do the examples of onomatopoeia change from stanza to stanza? So, what is the shift in sound between 1 and 3? And how do the sounds of the words create a feeling or mood? Write annotations to explain your idea. For focus question number 1, I went with the yellow. So yellow annotations are examples again of words that are sounds and sounds that are words, which is one of our figures of speech, figurative language, onomatopoeia. So with that, let me read stanza 1. Stanza 1, hear the sledges with the bells, silver bells. What a world of merriment their melody foretells. How they tinkle, tinkle, tinkle in the icy air of night, while the stars that oversprinkle all the heavens seem to twinkle with a crystalline delight, keeping time, time, time in a sort of runic rhyme to the tintinnabulation that so musically wells from the bells, 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 from the jingling and the tinkling of the bells. So again, in yellow, examples of sounds that are words and words that are sounds. I highlighted line 4, and I created the note, tinkle is an example of onomatopoeia in stanza 1. This sound, tinkle, creates a light and happy mood in the stanza. The overall tone of this stanza seems to be one of merriment. This sound, again to me, it is light, it is happy, creates an overall feeling and emotion of merriment. Looks very appropriate because in line 3, it tells us these bells create a world of merriment. So that's what I should be feeling when I read this stanza. A second example of sounds that are words and words that are sounds of onomatopoeia again. In line 14, jingle and tinkle. And what I simply put here, jingle and tinkle are 2 other examples of onomatopoeia and also create a happy and light mood. This stanza begins and ends, it's bookended, with a tone of merriment. So the sounds I heard at the beginning are the sounds that I also end on. A very light, happy sound, which creates that overall tone of merriment. Now, I'm going to compare and contrast that to the third stanza. So I'm skipping over 2, moving into 3. Hear the loud alarum bells, brazen bells. What a tale of terror now their turbulency tells. In the startled ear of night, how they scream out their affright, too much horrified to speak, they can only shriek, shriek, out of tune, in a clamorous appealing to the mercy of the fire, in a mad expostulation with the deaf and frantic fire, leaping higher, 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 with a desperate desire and a resolute endeavor now to sit or never by the side of the pale-faced moon. Oh, the bells, 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 what a tale their terror tells of despair, how they clang and clash and roar, what a horror they outpour on the bosom of the palpitating air. Yet the ear it fully knows by the twanging and the clanging how the danger ebbs and flows. Yet the ear distinctly tells in the jangling and the wrangling how the danger sinks and swells by the sinking or the swelling in the anger of the bells, of the bells, of the bells, 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 in the clamor and the clanging of the bells. Listening to that, this stanza is much more abrasive and unsettling to the ear compared to stanza 1. Onomatopoeia is apparent throughout this. There is definitely more than what I have annotated, but there are 3 sections that really stand out to me. The first time I hear it, clang, clash, and roar, not only is clang and clash examples of onomatopoeia, but they are also examples of what you'd see in number 2, alliteration, the CLA, CLA, cluck, cluck sound that's being made. So I'd realize this has 2 different pieces of figurative language to them. What I put here, so again, how they clang, clash, and roar. Clang, clash, and roar are examples of onomatopoeia. These sounds are harsh and abrasive. This creates a frightening mood and a tone of terror. Now, of course, this only makes sense in stanza 3. We are in a fire, and the bells we're hearing, it's a fire alarm. You would want them to sound harsh. You would want them to be abrasive. They should call you to attention. You should want to get up and run away from the fire. Other examples I saw, twanging and clanging, twang and clang. A twang is like pulling the wrong string on a guitar or a violin. It's not a good sound. Clanging, dumping a bunch of pots and pans in the sink. Again, not a good sound. Twanging and clanging are 2 other examples of onomatopoeia. These sounds are not harmonious and are unpleasant to listen to. True, you would not want to listen to a song with a lot of twanging on the instruments or a lot of clanging on the drums. Not good sounds for us. We want to get up and get away from these sounds. It fits with the purpose, again, of these alarm bells. And the last part, clamor and clang, again, very similar to what we see in 54. In clamor and clang, you hear the cluck, cluck sound. Again, an example of alliteration, along with onomatopoeia. So we end with, in the clamor and the clanging of the bells. How this stands out to me, the stanza ends with clamor and clanging, which again are unpleasant sounds. These sounds make the scene seem chaotic and create a terrifying tone. Yeah, overall, I'm stuck in a fire. I am terrified. I have a terrifying tone to this stanza. When contrasted to stanza 1, we ended on a tone of merriment. So, subject wise, both stanzas were covering bells. Both stanzas, they're taking place at night. Poetic style, I see repetition in these final lines, and we always end on the sound that these bells are making. But realize these are different bells from stanza to stanza. Each one creates a different mood. This leads to a different tone throughout each stanza. A mood of happiness, a tone of merriment. Over here, I've got a mood of terror, and I'd say a tone too of terror. With that, let's move into 2. In his poem, Poe includes a great deal of alliteration, which is the repetition of consonant sounds at the beginning of words. Clang and clash, and then at the bottom 2, clamor and clang, 2 examples. He goes on, or I'm sorry, whoever wrote this goes on with, such as the W and the M in What a World of Merriment, their melody foretells. So you can hear the alliteration there, merriment melody. In the first stanza, highlight a few examples of alliteration in the 3rd stanza of the poem. Annotate to describe the effect the consonant sounds create. So specifically, we'll do this in the 3rd. I believe looking over my annotations, I did it a little bit throughout the poem. Alliteration, I put in green. So going off what they said, hey, this example in stanza 1, what a world of merriment their melody foretells. Merriment and melody begin with the me or me or m sound. This alliteration calls attention to the idea that these bells ring in a happy tone. What a world of merriment their melody foretells. The m brings your ear to attention. Oh, what are they doing? They're singing out a world of merriment. How pleasant to hear. And again, it gets stressed because of the alliteration. Now, we've been specifically told go back and check out the third stanza, which we'll move to. Stanza 3, examples I found. Tale of terror, turbulency tells. And I'm sorry if I read that actually even with a there. What a tale of terror now their turbulency tells. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 T sounds. Also poetic structure. This is describing what the bells are doing, just as in stanza 1. This is describing what the bells are doing, really describing the sound they are creating. So what did I say? The repetition of these T sounds, what's being called? Tale, terror, turbulency, all begin with the T or T sound at the beginning of their words. This again is alliteration. These bells are ringing chaotically, and they have a tale of terror, which is emphasized by the alliteration. So again, stanza 1 and 3, we've already looked at the sounds. One has a tone of merriment, one has a tone of terror, which really gets brought to the forefront at the beginning of each stanza through alliteration. The repetition of those sounds should waken you up, call your attention to what is being said. Other examples I have, and it might be a little bit of overkill, I found desperate desire, tale their terror tells, which is a callback to 38. Nothing else in 3 for alliteration. So let's see, what were the notes here? Desperate desire, desperate and desire are examples of alliteration. This calls attention to what the bells desire to do in this moment. And when we look at personification, we'll talk a little bit more about what are they trying to do. And then 52 again, which is almost a repeat of line 38. 52, simply I put, this is a similar example to line 38. It comes immediately after hearing the bells ring in the previous line. Again, you see that repetition, bells, bells, bells. Same way all the stanza ends or end, but this time there's a break in the middle. We'll talk about red when we get to number 4. I believe, too, I had a couple other examples of alliteration just to really drive the idea home. We looked at stanza 1 and 3, so 4 is a little bit of extra. Melancholy menace, right? Alliteration is used to describe the tone of the iron bells. They have a melancholy menace, which sounds similar to a sad and oppressive sound. We have there in throats, they and that, and human heart, really just quick lines with alliteration, ta-ta, ta-ta, and ha-ha, make the reader read quicker. Because of that initial sound, you're not changing the placement of the tongue in the mouth, so words come out in a quicker manner. Just simply, again, their throats, they, that, and human heart. All examples, again, of alliteration. Again, a little bit of overkill. Focus question number 2 only tells us 1 and 3, so doing 4 is a little extra. With that, let's move on to focus question number 3. We are looking at personification. And personification is representing an inanimate thing or an idea as a person. Highlight examples of personification in the 3rd and 4th stanzas and annotate to explore how these examples affect the poem's meaning and tone. So again, personification, giving something that's not human, human-like qualities. Let's see in stanza 3 and 4 how these bells get personified. How do they become human? I see my loud alarm bells. What are they doing? They scream out their affright. Too much horrified to speak, they can only shriek, shriek. So in this case, the bells, they are able to speak, right? However, you're told they're not speaking, they are screaming. What are they screaming? They're screaming that they're frightened. You're told these bells, they are too horrified to speak. So instead of speaking, they scream and they shriek, shriek. Now, shriek, repetition, onomatopoeia in that example too. Shrieks do not sound good. And even at that, you're told they're shrieking out of tune. Personification is used to show the alarm of the alarum bells. Hopefully that wordplay makes you laugh. You can hear the joy in my voice, right? They are screaming and shrieking because of the fire. This is a contrast to both previous sets of bells, the silver sleigh bells and the golden wedding bells, seen in stanzas 1 and 2. Let's talk a little bit about that fire. Is that fire personified? In a clamorous appealing to the mercy of the fire, and a mad expostulation with the deaf and frantic fire. Two ideas of personification. One, what are the bells doing? They are appealing, they are begging for the fire to stop. They are begging for the mercy of the fire. However, what do I know about this fire? Well, this fire is deaf and frantic. If you're deaf, you are not going to hear these bells begging. The bells, again, are begging the fire to stop, but the fire is deaf and does not hear them. Example of personification on two fronts. Bells are begging like a human can do. The fire is deaf like a human could be. Expostulation too is like throwing a temper tantrum, kind of screaming, but also moving with your arms and your legs, very exaggerated movements to go along with your speech. Let me see if I had any other purple in 3. No. Any purple in 4? I see 1. Just going to the bottom. No. So one example here of personification that I found. How can I personify these iron bells? For every sound that floats from the rust within their throats is a groan. So very simple. These bells, they're told to have throats, and what comes out of their throats is a groan. Does a bell have a throat? No. Can a bell groan? No. But really, focusing on this word right here, groan. To groan is not a happy sound. You groan when you have to do chores. You groan to take out the trash. You groan to wash the dishes. You groan to watch a sibling or a younger cousin, right? So groan is a sound associated with sadness or desperation. Now, if my iron bells are groaning, they must be sad or desperate. Now, when you read the rest of the stanza, you'd realize you're at a church, it's a funeral, there is sadness to the human heart, and who is ringing this bell? None other than a ghoul, right? Definitely gets spooky in stanza 4. Only appropriate then, right? That these bells are not having a good time. And our final one, let's look at it. How does Poe use word choice, sound devices, imagery, and other poetic elements to give the poem a feeling of terror and suspense? So they're already telling us in 4, hey, this poem has terror and suspense in it. Now, really blanket word choice, sound, imagery, any elements, right? In your mind, how does Poe create this feeling of terror and suspense? So with that, I did these ones in red. And I'll tell you really, I just focused on repetition of the bells. The reason being is because we already talked about onomatopoeia. I talked about alliteration. We talked about personification. I still want to leave some things to you, right? You can talk about rhyme scheme. You can talk about stanza length and line length. For myself, with 4, I'm going to focus in on repetition. Now, could you focus on other parts? Yes, of course. But again, I'm trying to leave some for you. Just leave you with my final idea. The bells, 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 bells is repeated continuously throughout the poem. I think in total, the word bells is said over 40 times. I've done a little tracking at the end of each stanza. The reason being is that's where you see a little similarity from stanza to stanza. It's repeated at the end of 1, repeated at the end of 2, at the end of 3, and at the end of 4. 3 and 4 slightly break, and maybe there's something to that. So again, stanza 1 ends on 12 and 13. We see bell repeated 7 times. It's not a problem for us in stanza 1 because, again, it is pleasant to hear the repetition of these bells. These are bells of merriment that are tinkling and seem to be in unison with the twinkling stars, right? We want to be in this moment. So, again, it is pleasant to hear the repetition of these bells. We don't mind it. They have a sound of joy and create a tone of merriment. Now, again, merriment, let's see how it devolves into terror and suspense. Is that seen in 2? I really did not touch 2 because I want to try to leave that for you. But bells is repeated here in the final 3 lines. I counted it out. I think it was 10. These bells, golden wedding bells, ring 10 times, which might suggest this stanza contains a feeling of greater joy than stanza 1. Stanza 1 had 7 repetitions, stanza 2 has 10. So maybe being at a wedding or getting married, is more enjoyable than riding a sleigh, right? Depends who you are in the wedding, of course, but that should be the focus. This has a little bit more of that joyous feeling than 1. Now getting into stanza 3, where we've already talked about it, terror starts to enter the scene. In this case, notice through the stanza, right at line 51, almost halfway, we get that repeating sound, bells, 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 which breaks the poem, kind of separates it. Hey, I've only heard this at the end. What's the deal with this break? The bells break the poem and interrupt the reading. This creates a bit of confusion. Why is there a break? Why am I hearing this now? Creates that frantic, anxious type of tone. Again, very appropriate given that this scene is set in a fire. You should be frantic. You should be anxious. That's correct emotions to have in this situation. Again, it gets repeated at the end. I see it here. And in total, bells is repeated 11 times in this stanza. In contrast to stanza 1 and 2, these bells are unpleasant. The reader might want them to stop. You might be a little annoyed, right? Hey, I want this one to end. You're happy, it does end, but then when you realize in 4, it doesn't get any better. That feeling of terror now turns into suspense. What is going to happen next? Stanza 3 didn't end well. Hopefully it gets better like 1 or 2, but then of course, that's not the writing style of Edgar Allan Poe. And we have that feeling of suspense, bridging stanza 3 into 4. And it doesn't get any better. The bells is repeated in line 99, in line 103, in line 109, 110, 111, 112. Let me see where I put my notes. Bells is repeated 15 times and breaks the poem twice, as you saw in 99 and 103. Phrases in line 100 through 101, and I'll go over those, now have an evil, ominous tone when compared to the same lines in stanza 1, which were lines 9 and 10. So real quickly, let me go back to lines 9 and 10 of stanza 1 and check this out. Keeping time, time, time in a sort of runic rhyme to the tintinnabulation that so musically wells. So 9 and 10 again. Repetition, time, 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 runic rhyme. So these bells seem to just keep repeating for all of time in a crystalline delight. Very nice scene to be in. However, in 4, who is ringing these bells? Let me start a little bit earlier. They are neither man nor woman. They are neither brute nor human. They are ghouls. So ghouls are ringing these bells. And their king it is who tolls, and he rolls, 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 rolls a paean from the bells, and his merry bosom swells with the paean of the bells, and he dances and he yells, keeping time, time, time in a sort of runic rhyme to the paean of the bells, keeping time, 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 in a sort of runic rhyme to the throbbing of the bells. So I missed that part too. It is repeated in 96 and 97. Time, 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 runic rhyme as seen in stanza 1. We want to be here in this time, happy, right? But in stanza 4, we've got the king of the ghouls ringing this iron bell that is groaning and playing on our human hearts. It's a scene you don't want to be in, but it seems like we're stuck, right? For all of time, 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 all of time, time, time. By now, the terror has set. We want to be done with this poem. With that, you are correct because that is the end of it. Now, if I'm thinking of a theme or a lesson, a little bit more to this. This poem is unpredictable, both in subject matter, in stanza length, in line length, in rhyme scheme. Subject wise, what are we talking about? I'm talking about bells, I'm talking about nighttime, and I'm talking about different emotions we feel. There is merriment in 1, joy in 2, terror in 3, and I'd say a mix of suspense and maybe a greater terror in 4. So putting those two ideas together, unpredictability, emotions we feel throughout life. A theme, a lesson to this maybe is that life is unpredictable. We cannot predict the times we will feel these emotions. That gets a little bit further because this this assessment is not necessarily going over just theme. Let's click over to the right tab. Your prompt, your close read this time around. In poetry, tone is the emotion or attitude you feel the author is trying to get across in the lines and stanzas of a poem. How does the tone of the poem change from stanza to stanza? Analyze how Edgar Allan Poe uses figurative language to change the tone of the poem from stanza to stanza. Hint, hint. Ask yourself how the poem becomes more charged in each subsequent stanza. Your response should be a paragraph of around 7 to 8 sentences and covers at least 2 examples of figurative language in the poem. We just covered 3. If you need a review, go back. Focus question 1, 2, and 3, okay? Make sure to use the race format with writing. Last tip for success, click split screen here on the right tab. That way, all of your annotations show up on your left-hand side and you're ready to compile only your best notes and your best pieces of text evidence into a nice, concise response. Answer the question again. How does the tone change from stanza to stanza based on the use of figurative language? I'm looking for 2 examples to be covered. If you do more than 2, that is fantastic. If you do less than 2, you do not meet my expectations. Very clear with that. I'm looking for 2. I'm sorry, a final note. This is the best rubric I could find. Instead of thinking of theme or instead of theme, you can just change it to tone, 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 and tone. Again, best I could find. It's still going to be out of a total of 8 points, so don't sweat that. Just realize, if you're looking at the rubric and you're like, oh, Pasanato's looking for theme, it's not the case, guys. I can't edit this, so I'm looking for tone instead of theme. If that's confusing, forget it. Don't even look at it. Focus here on your prompt. When done, press submit, and good luck, everybody.